choice for true alternative music. Check us out online at rsu.edu. Real College Radio, 91.3 FM.
You're just in time. Go ahead and come along inside. We here at RSU Radio have gathered 9 new scary stories to share with you, if you think you can handle it. Our first story is written by one of our very own RSU students. This is Echoes in the Abyss by Josh Myer, read by Ted Jones.
The dreams keep happening, and I can feel it under my skin. The scratching that makes my body twitch and contort in the most horrendous positions during the night. When I wake, I'm in pain from the visages in my dreams that scar me to the core. Structures that stand miles tall with buildings cobbled together from stone that defy the computational laws of man, all cracked and dripping with a putrid gelatinous sludge that reaches out to encompass me. I run to little avail, for my feet travel no distance. Then, from the darkness, a set of eyes, red with fire, whose stare feels as if it's burning my very soul to cinders. The beating echoes in the distance, growing ever louder like a thundering drum. The structures quake and the rocks fall to crush me, yet I am only coated in the dark sludge upon impact. I scream, yet my voice has abandoned me. Instead, a chanting in a tongue unfamiliar to my own echoes, and symbols on the walls become visible. The lines from something reminiscent of futurism, yet the language has the aura of being older than time itself. Louder and louder the chanting grows until I writhe from madness. When I wake, I'm 6 or 7 feet from my bed. The only remnants of the incessant beating are the crashing waves upon the rocks outside the lighthouse, and the whispers have faded into the faint coos of the seagulls. Pulling myself from the worn oak flooring, I stumble my way into the washroom. The thundering bellows of the sea can be heard just outside my window, crashing upon the rocks with ferocity. The sunlight cautiously pushes through the darkness as the seagulls now find their full voices. The mirror above the water basin isn't kind this morning. I lock eyes with myself and stare into the dark green depths, which are accented by the ghastliest shade of purple that hangs just below. Dipping my hands into the cool water brings momentary relief as I splash it against my worn face. Keep it together, Phineas. On the wall hangs what once was a towel but now is scarcely a rag. It sits next to the only semblance of ease this world has granted me, or rather, my physician has. A pear-shaped bottle sits teetering on the edge of a shelf by the window. The bottle's cork is removed with ease, and I take a swig of the burning liquid. An F-prom is reflected in the mirror just above the sink. After brushing the restlessness from my coarse cinnamon-shaded hair, I walk to my calendar located in one corner of the cramped kitchen. With my jackknife, I scratch an X over the current date. November 16th, 1922. Only a little over a month now. You're so close. My writing desk lay before an open window looking out on the sea, and the typewriter I brought from home basks in the warm light pouring in. The sound of the wind and waves comfort me as the light warms my fingertips. I begin to recount the events that led me to this moment. I had recently graduated from Maine University with a degree in journalism. Though the last few weeks of my schooling proved rather difficult, I had developed chronic insomnia, which seemingly could be put to ease with a dose of morphine, as recommended by my doctor. The stress and pressure from my coursework leading up to graduation was most likely the cause. The doctor believed the issue would subside once my time at the university concluded. True enough, I began resting easier. Admittedly, at the time it had been quite difficult to shake my dependency of the substance, and I continue struggling with my own self-medication. I figured finding a career I was passionate about would be the cure for my ailments, and I began seeking out jobs where I could apply my writing skills. One morning, an ad caught my eye while thumbing through the paper over coffee. Lighthouse keeper needed. 6-month position, excellent pay. Qualifications? Must be able to lift 80 pounds, general handiwork experience, and an affinity for the sea. Should be comfortable with total isolation for long periods of time. If interested, write back to the main post for more details. As an aspiring journalist, I saw this as the perfect opportunity to get some quality writing in without any distractions. The idea of composing an expose on the daily routine and maintenance of a lighthouse struck a chord with me. Surely readers would be fascinated in the elusive lifestyle of the seldom-seen Wiki, guardian of the sea. Excitedly, I contacted the paper and accepted the position. I imagined once I returned home after the 6 months concluded, I would sell the story to the main post in exchange for a position at the paper. I, Phineas Quincy, would join the ranks of the other esteemed columnists who would write on politics, history, or art, in which the ignorant masses would peruse, ponder, and purposely sip their morning tea. The day I set off for the island, I was greeted at the Portsmouth harbor by a shrunken, salty sea captain and his skiff. The vessel in which I would embark could have been considered an extremely small tugboat, or simply an oversized longboat. Either way, it was difficult to discern between the two, as it was shrouded by black smoke emanating from the engine, which sputtered and spat. The captain looked me up and down skeptically. "Now what be a fine young lad, such as yourself, doing taking up his lonesome in the light?" I explained the advertisement and my goals I hoped to achieve over the months. His expression lightened, and he motioned for me to join him on board. The waves were choppy as we scuttled along the salty expanse. It was a several-hour embarkment to the island, and I had spent most of that time asleep at the stern. A strange sensation engulfed me, and I was jolted awake by a thundering crest that made the ship shudder. The captain turned to me with a bellowing guffaw. "Your nightmare hasn't even started, boy. Rest easy." "What?" "You'll have your work cut out for you when we arrive. A fire took part of the tool shed in a storm not long ago. Your various tools and equipment managed to survive unscathed, though. The last keeper, it seems, was rather aloof. Abandoning his post caused the sinking of several ships on the rocks in a thick fog. When crews went to relieve him of duty, he was nowhere to be found." There was a long pause in between the seaman's words. "Be wary of the cliffs, boy. 'Tis a quick drop and a painful death before the sea claims ye. If it doesn't claim your mind first." The small dock at the foot of the island came into view, and I grabbed what little belongings I had with me. My typewriter and black trunk with clothing and toiletries served as my only companions on this journey I had embarked upon. The captain tipped his hat as he cast off. I turned and followed the rocky trail up to the Scarlet Tower. It was a quaint living space with only the minimal necessities for survival: kitchen, twin bed, a desk, and a small washroom with a water basin. As the sea captain suggested, the first month had been the most intensive due to the previous keeper being negligent of his duties on the island. The oil drums were all but full, and the tool shed had partially burned when it was supposedly struck in a lightning storm. Luckily, I was left supplies to refurbish what had burned. Over time, I found that the simple advertisement that had drawn me to the position left much to be desired as far as the work experience required to run the facilities. Luckily, the tool shed held a chest of books that contained the information I was seeking. Some of the materials were partially singed but otherwise legible. History of the Light, by Albert Wentworth. Motor Mechanic's Guide to Fixing Engines, by Francis Dumont. Secrets of the Fisherman, by Gunter Morris. At the bottom of the chest was a schematic for the lighthouse and its mechanisms. Every night, I would flip through the various authors and information, jotting down notes that would eventually formulate my daily work routine. I could not attempt any writing until halfway through my second month. By then, everything had finally been sewn, nailed, and fashioned back into working condition, and now I had the time to work on my own craft. My typewriter sat menacingly before me, yet the words wouldn't come. I tried the next night, and the night after that. Nothing. I had never faced a void such as this before. Previously, the words seemed to come to mind with such ease, yet this place had drained my energy for such things. I was not discouraged at this unforeseen predicament, and figured the inspiration would come to me soon enough. The next morning, I patrolled the cliffside where I noticed strange engravings in the overarching stone. Well worn from the incessant crashing of the waves, jagged symbols and characters could barely be made out. I'm not sure why, but upon seeing these symbols, it sent a frigid chill down my spine. I left the cliffside and continued with my routine. That night was the first in which the dream came to me. I woke that morning in pain, my mouth covered in foaming drool. Back then I hadn't yet recalled the nightmare in its entirety, only fragments. I tried to make sense of it but couldn't find the answers I was looking for. The dreams continued, only to become more vivid with each passing night. I was getting less and less sleep, and my work ethic reflected this. Disorder slowly seeped its way back into the lighthouse. I found that resting during light hours brought brief ease of mind to me. One day, I was working in the tool shed. refilling the kerosene lamps when the oil canister slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. Cursing, I picked it up and noticed under the old workbench was a leather-bound book caked in dust. I set the canister down and picked up the book in one hand. With a deep breath, I blew a layer of dust away, uncovering its face, which had not seen the light of day in quite some time. It depicted the silhouette of a creature emerging between two stone towers. The leather was well worn, but the jacket exhibited the same symbols I had seen before, carved into the cliffside. Its weight was unusual in that it was heavier than one might think based on its girth and appearance, and something else was off about its pages. They were covered in dried algae and sea salt, giving the pages an iridescent hue of green. The longer I held it, the more I felt the urge to open the book and examine its contents. My vision must have begun to blur, because it appeared as if the symbols on the cover were lifting themselves from their engravings. A whisper brushed my ear, causing me to blunder backwards into one of the shelves. Relia. The wind seemed to carry the words about the cramped space. I slammed the book down on the workbench and hastily left the oil lamps behind. That night was when I could truly see every element that plagued my dreams. The collapsing city of stone, the black ooze, and the eyes. Those burning eyes. I haven't been back in that tool shed since, but I know I cannot continue like this. I fear that my heart may give out if I keep experiencing this level of terror. All this is connected to the book. I know it is. Tomorrow I will cast it into the sea in good faith that the dreams will cease. I could not forge a better remedy in my mind as to how I would rid myself from this madness. I am unsure of my fate if casting the scripts to the sea fails to alleviate my woes. I stopped writing just shy of midnight and leaned back in the tired chair in which I sat. My bones ached in unison with the shrill creaking of its wood. I had not written anything since my previous attempt several months ago. I looked to the calendar, which boasts 30 more days until I am freed from this voluntary imprisonment. It won't be long now, I repeated to myself in an attempt for reassurance. I pushed through my exhaustion until daybreak. It was a queer sensation from when I gazed out my windows. I saw no familiar landscape, only a dark gray sheath encapsulating the fogged glass. I unlatched the cast iron deadbolt from the splinter-infested front door and stepped outside into the unfamiliar. The sun did not rise over the horizon, for it was shrouded in a fog so thick that it prevented the vision of my own two hands before my eyes. The pit in my stomach clenched, and I threw up upon the rocks before me. The lack of vision combined with the morphine had twisted my sense of balance. Stumbling, I propped myself up on the scarlet exterior of the lighthouse. A thought scratched at the forefront of my mind as I muttered to myself. The kerosene lamps. I dared not venture to the cliffside in such thick fog, for it would mean the end of me, at least in my current state. A trip that would normally take me mere moments felt like hours as I cautiously took my first steps towards the tool shed. My balance was askew, and I opted to crawl on all fours across the rocky path for the sake of potentially saving myself from injury. My head knocked against a hard surface, and I looked up to see the entrance of the tool shed. I stood looking at the jigsaw puzzle that was my handiwork, and entered the structure. There sat the lamps in which I had abandoned months ago. I filled one with oil and pulled a faded matchbox from one of the shelves. Scraping it against the side of the box, the match I had selected caught flame with ease. It took longer than I had anticipated for the oil to set aflame, yet when the glow began, it filled the small space. Within moments the fog dissipated, and the lopsided rectangular room formed before me. A quick breath put out the match, and I tossed it to the floor of the shack. The smoking remnants wafted its way up into my line of sight. There sat the leather book on the workbench, tinting the fog that lingered in its green aura. I reached out and grabbed for it, avoiding eye contact with the symbols on the cover. The fog seemed to lift in a small circle around me as I clutched the lamp in my other hand and began making my way to the cliffside. Paranoia was my travel companion, for from the corner of my eye I could see shapes in the fog. Dark silhouettes that boasted human-like forms emanated in the mist but vanished just as quick as they were acknowledged. However, as I approached the cliffside, these silhouettes lingered for longer and longer periods of time. The fear was growing in me, and I questioned whether I was going mad. Lost in thought, I nearly cast myself to the sea, as I now stood at the very edge of the cliffside. I stumbled backward. My absolute resolve brought a calmness over the fears accompanying me, and I stood once again with strong affirmation of what I had to do. It had been a long time since the bellows of my voice rang out, and from it was a rage that had festered inside. "Plague me no more, and return to the hell in whence ye came!" I cast the book into the sea, but my only response was the crashing of the waves below me. I sat silent, listening to the wind howl as the mist from the sea cast itself upon me. The sensation of relief flooded back into my body, and I realized just how exhausted I truly was. I could feel the fleeting strength within me as I attempted to lift my tired bones from where I had perched. With the lamp in hand, I made my way back towards the lighthouse. In the distance, an orange glowing aura emanated and grew brighter as I continued my approach. It was the tool shed, swelling in an insurmountable blaze. I set my lamp down and ran to the shed. The match must have been hot enough to light the oil residue which still resided after all these months. Into the blaze I ran, retrieving what I could, the chest of books and various tools. I looked to the main workbench and stopped cold amongst the burning ash above my head. The fear had been reborn. My soul cried out in terror. It could not be. There sat the leather-bound book which I had cast into the sea just moments ago. An animalistic rage enveloped me. I swept the items from the shelves and slammed my fist repeatedly on the workbench. The reality had settled in, that hope was completely devoid in this place. I let out a cry that emanated from my very soul, for in that moment, I wished the sweet release of death to fall upon me. With fists still clenched, I turned to gaze upon the book. I picked it up, and the symbols began floating off the cover. My body became entranced, and my legs moved of their own volition. Visions and consciousness were fading from me. For brief moments I could see my surroundings, and I realized I was now directly in front of the cliffside engravings, which too were rising from their stone reliefs. The whispers from my dreams spoke, and I could hear their echoes in the abyss. I opened the pages of the book, and instantly the world changed around me. The incessant bellows of the sea were replaced with the deep vibrations of an all-too-familiar drumming. Thum, thum, thum. From the fog, dark stone structures rose before my very eyes, and the symbols glowed with an energy only comparative to light. My body was sinking into the floor, which mutated into an ooze darker than night itself. The chanting, despite its horrific tongue, I found I could now understand.
Relia. Relia. The gate is open.
It emanated from every direction, repeatedly. Between the infinite towers, a green light shone through the fog, and the red eyes emerged. Accompanying the fiery gaze was a hulking silhouette of a creature that my mind could not fathom. It only partially came into view moments at a time, but I could make out what could only be described as a writhing, tentacled monolith. Its body was that of a Homo sapien, but its back was encased with scales that protruded into a set of jagged wings. They swayed up and down, and the drumming swelled from them. I could not look away as the monster bore its gaze into me, festering its plague-riddled horrors into my soul. My gaze was broken by the leather-bound book as it began to lift before my eyes. No, it was not rising, but rather I was sinking into the freezing, dark, eternal ooze. A great light shone from its pages, and the demon shrieked with a sound that crumbled one of the towers in the distance. My head sunk into the putridness, and I struggled to breathe. Reaching an arm out, my fingers brushed the binding of the book. I managed to get a firm grasp, and soon my other arm was able to find a hold as well. Pulling my head from the depths, I gasped for air, and the monolith screeched. I did not know how I found the strength to fight off the creature's gaze, but I managed to keep my eyes shut. My legs, too, now were free of the encompassing slime, and the ground seemed to turn solid once more. The light from the book was blinding, and shone through my clamped eyelids. I forced with all the strength I could muster the two ends of the book together in the chance I could end this hellish besmirching of reality. The monolith writhed in pain as the book's covers grew ever closer to one another, and it darted towards me. Closer and closer the behemoth barreled forward, reaching out its razor-pronged hand as the light from the book was now only a sliver. With fleeting strength, I managed to constrain the sleeves between my hands. The light dissipated from the book momentarily before sending the creature and I flying back in a concussive blast, my head slamming against one of the stone structures behind me. As I regained consciousness, light poured through my tired eyes, and I could feel the mist of the sea upon my face. The wind carried its salt-riddled scent all about me. Gradual blurs began taking form before a large sea crested and shook the weariness before me. The jolt pulled me from my daze, and I now fully recognized my surroundings. I found I was resting against the stern of a skiff, whose size could have only been considered an extremely small tugboat, or simply an oversized longboat. Either way, it was difficult to discern between the two, as it was shrouded by black smoke emanating from the engine, which sputtered and spat. I gazed upon a shrunken man in a seafarer's hat, and he turned to me with a smile on his face. A strange sensation engulfed me. I could not recall what made me lurch so violently, but it was enough to elicit laughter from the sea captain. "Your nightmare hasn't even started, boy. Rest easy."
Our next tale is written by another fellow RSU student.